Good afternoon. My name is Jessie White, and I'm a city senior planner for Denver Landmark Preservation. And today I'm going to be talking to you about historic window repair and replacement. The presentation should last around 20 minutes, at the end of which I'll open up the presentation for questions and answers. So before we dive right in, I'd like to go over a few presentation rules. First and foremost, everyone is welcome to participate. Staff will call on participants at the end of the meeting to ask questions or make comments. I ask that we keep questions brief, no more than 1 to 2 minutes per person. And finally, I ask that everyone be respectful. If you'd like to participate and are joining via computer, please add your questions to the Q&A box or use the raise hand function, and we'll answer your questions that way. If you're joining by phone, you may press *6 to unmute yourself. And finally, we are recording this webinar, and if you miss anything, you can watch it later on our webpage. So to kick things off, I think that it's important to figure out why we're here. Why does Landmark Preservation review historic window replacement? Why do we care about a bunch of dusty old windows? And the answer to that is pretty straightforward in my mind. We include historic windows as part of our review process for two primary reasons: to preserve the historic character of the building and to preserve the integrity. So windows are part of the historic character of the building, whether they're high-style stained glass windows, interesting divided light windows, or simple 1/1 double hung windows. The placement, proportions, patterning, and materials add to the character of the overall building. Next, we'll go into integrity, and I break that up into two types of integrity. So historic integrity and physical integrity. In many cases, with historic integrity, windows were custom built and installed to fit a specific window opening with the intention of making the building look a certain way stylistically. Again, windows are part of the character of the building, and maintaining or replacing them with high quality materials to match the historic windows is key in maintaining that historic integrity for the entire building. The second part of the integrity is physical integrity. Historic windows are constructed in such a way that they could easily be repaired without impacting the physical integrity of the building. When windows and window frames are removed entirely from their window openings, it can potentially cause damage to the historic building over time. Additionally, certain modern materials, particularly modern windows with high thermoplastic content, can flex and warp in warm and cool temperatures, and put strain on historic rough openings. Typically in Denver, these are softer historic brick rough openings, so it can really cause some damage if it flexes and warps in the freezing and hot temperatures. Finally, modern window materials cannot be easily repaired if they can be repaired at all. In most cases, when modern windows are removed entirely, they're put into a landfill and then replaced with new windows. This creates a lifetime cycle of replacement that not only adds to the waste of the landfill, it can also have a negative impact on the physical integrity of the building in the long run, because you're ripping out modern window material and then installing new modern window material. So the purpose of Landmark is to preserve the historic and physical integrity of designated properties, and as such, we review historic window replacement. So now I'm going to talk to you about how you can benefit from restoring your historic windows rather than replacing them. And in my mind, those benefits can be boiled down into 4 categories: sustainability, longevity, cost effectiveness, and tax credits. All 4 of these categories kind of go hand in hand. So if I sound a bit like a broken record, that's why they all kind of go hand in hand. So with sustainability, as the saying goes, the greenest building is the one that's already built. The same can be said for historic windows. Historic windows have an embodied energy value that includes all of the energy from milling and construction to the transportation of that window material to the installation of the window. So restoring existing windows conserves that embodied energy that was expanded years ago and reduces the use of additional energy needed to replace the windows. As I stated before, historic windows are often custom made to fit the openings for a specific building. These windows were constructed in such a way that they can be easily taken apart and repaired over time. This means putting less materials in the landfill. Pulley systems and weights can be accessed typically through a pocket in the frame and can be repaired using existing weights and new cotton ropes. Or you can install a modern spring-loaded weight system to the existing frame. Damaged or missing putty can be removed and replaced with new putty. Cracked glazing can be removed and replaced by removing the putty and the glazing points and installing new glazing. On historic windows, typically what goes first are the horizontal members rather. Usually these surfaces, because they are horizontal, moisture tends to stand on them, and that can cause rot over time. So window sashes can be removed from the openings pretty simply by removing the stops and pulling the entire sash out of the frame. Sashes are usually put together using simple mortise and tenon joints. So rotted members can be taken apart and replaced with new members to help extend the life of that window. The same can be done with the frames and seals. Modern windows, on the other hand, are not made to be taken apart. They use industrial strength adhesives a lot of times, are made in factories, and they just aren't made to be taken apart. And once they've served their purpose, they often end up in a landfill, adding to the overall waste. And often these windows don't recoup the energy that was expended to make them in the first place. And that brings me to longevity. Since historic window materials are made to be repaired over time, this means that they have to be maintained, that they can be maintained indefinitely through those processes that I just talked about, taking the window apart and replacing or repairing damaged portions of the sash. So replacement windows, on the other hand, generally have a warranty of about 20 years before they have to be replaced. Again, this material cannot be salvaged or recycled, and it often ends up in the landfill. I was able to uncover some additional details on warranties for modern windows while researching for this presentation. In one article in particular, Windows of Opportunity by Rebecca Williams with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, she had this to say: many window replacements also come with limited lifetime warranties. Even the better quality replacement windows limit the lifetime warranty of glass to 20 years, insulation to 2 years, and non-glass components to 10 years. Lifetime better describes the lifetime of the product, not the lifetime of the building. Research indicates that 30% of the time, a replacement window will be replaced within 10 years. Replacement windows are called replacement for a reason. So keeping in mind sustainability and longevity impacts, let's move on to cost effectiveness of window replacement versus window restoration. So some people argue that historic windows are not energy efficient, losing homeowners through air infiltration and heating and cooling bills. I'm here to tell you that any penetration from the exterior to the interior of the house will lose energy. Whether it be through wall outlets, windows, doors, chimneys, or roofs, all of these are ways that your property is losing energy over time. And according to data collected by the US Department of Energy, windows typically account for only 10% of that total air loss for most buildings. So this number can be significantly reduced using weather stripping, storm windows, or the addition of double pane glazing to historic windows. Additional studies have shown that double glazed replacement windows save typically only $3 per year per window in energy costs. Yet the savings in energy costs takes about 50 to 70 years to recover when the cost of replacement windows and installation is calculated in. And I'm here to tell you too that it's extremely rare to find a replacement window that is made to last 50 to 70 years. So recouping that savings is nearly impossible. Like I said, replacement windows typically have a warranty for 20 years and are generally replaced within 10. So looking at the average window replacement costs in Denver for a high quality window that fits a historic rough opening, it can cost anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 per window, depending on these windows only last. This depends on, they cost around $1,000 to $2,500 per window, depending. And these windows will only last on average 10 years before they must be replaced. I would say in Denver, that cost is probably closer to the $2,500 per window side of things, because Denver tends to be a little more expensive. Historic window restoration, on the other hand, ranges roughly $200 to $2,000 per window. This greatly depends on the type of window, the amount of restoration needed, but these repairs can extend the life of the historic window indefinitely, especially when regular maintenance is performed, which means that in 10 to 20 years, you aren't going to have to spend that amount again, as long as you keep up with general maintenance. So restoration costs, when coupled with weatherization materials such as storms, weather stripping, or double pane glazing, leads to increased energy efficiency and energy savings. It also leads to less waste in the landfill and lower overall cost for maintenance rather than outright replacement. That brings me to my last benefit, tax credits. Denver offers a 20% tax credit for residential structures and 25% tax credit for income producing properties. So window restoration, the addition of storms, the addition of weatherization materials such as double pane glazing, would likely qualify for a tax credit, helping to reduce the overall cost of window restoration and energy efficiency work. The tax credit can also be applied to window replacement so long as the windows are beyond feasible repair and are replaced with materials that are high quality and help to maintain the historic character of the building. This is a very helpful aid that's underutilized here, especially for window restoration or appropriate window replacement. So I'd highly encourage anyone that's thinking about replacing their window or restoring their windows to take a look at this tax credit program. So let's move on to landmark review process for what the landmark review process for window replacement looks like. I'll start by covering the process for historic window replacement, followed by a case study, and then move on to a process for non-historic window replacement and a case study. So with historic window replacement, applicants will need to submit the following items: a site plan or floor plans labeling the location of the windows to be replaced, either elevation drawings or elevation photographs labeling the location of the windows to be replaced, labeled detailed images of the photos to be of the windows to be replaced, showing their condition, and a cut sheet for the proposed replacement window. Keeping in mind that Landmark currently only allows the use of wood or aluminum clad wood replacement windows on historic buildings. So if you're replacing fewer than 3 historic windows that are not on the primary facade and are not highly decorative windows like leaded glass windows, staff can typically review these types of projects administratively. The administrative process takes about 5 to 10 business days once we have a complete application, keeping in mind that windows that are approved for replacement must be beyond feasible repair in order to go through the admin process. If you're replacing more than 3 historic windows, replacing windows on the front facade, or replacing ornate windows, you'll need to go through the Landmark Preservation Commission for review. If you're replacing more than 3 historic windows, you'll need to have historic window evaluation completed. This is typically done by an outside third-party professional that will not benefit from the replacement of the windows. The third-party professional will need to include a window condition matrix and a narrative describing the assessor's experience with reviewing historic materials and an assessment of the windows' condition. In addition, window comparison sheets must be submitted showing how closely the proposed windows match the existing historic windows. So we want to keep that character intact as much as possible if replacement is warranted. Once staff has completed the application, has a complete application, we work to schedule you for the next available LPC meeting. That's typically a 4-week filing process. Again, in these cases, the windows should be in beyond feasible repair in order for replacement to be supported by staff to the commission. And again, I'm going to use this opportunity to plug our preservation tax credit program, as window repair replacement and replacement with appropriate materials could qualify for a tax credit. And I'll finish this slide by stating that restoration and the addition of weatherization materials such as double pane glazing or weather stripping or storm windows, these don't require landmark reviews. That's a nice carrot to dangle for people that are thinking about restoring their windows, that it kind of prevents them from having to go through some of the landmark process. So now let's move on to our case study for historic window replacement. This is a project that came in 2019. The property owners on this house had to do some stabilization work on the turret of the home as it had settled, and the stabilization work caused the windows to become unlevel. So in the lower image, you can see the extent of this level issue. It's pretty off, pretty substantially off. In addition, the windows were in a severe state of disrepair with cracked glazing. They had rotted rails and stiles. They have failing putty. Of the damage, some of this damage can be seen in the upper photo of the slide. There were a lot more photographs and a lot more windows that were replaced, but this just gives you kind of a clear idea of what state these windows were in. In this case, the extent of the misalignment and the disrepair of the windows warranted replacement. In the lower right, far right image, you can see the side-by-side comparison of the historic window and the new windows. These were a very close match and would not have had a major impact on the character or integrity of the building. So this project did have to go before the Landmark Preservation Commission and was approved by the commission because the existing windows were beyond feasible repair and the proposed replacement windows matched the existing windows as closely as possible. So let's move on to replacing non-historic windows. And I know that some of you are listening to me talk about historic windows and thinking that's good, great, restore old windows, whatever. But what if my windows have already been replaced and they're non-historic? Well, Landmark does have a process for that as well. Requests for non-historic window replacements can typically go through our administrative process. Again, that typically takes 5 to 10 business days once we have a complete application. This type of review hinges on whether or not the proposed replacement materials fit the character of the house and are high quality materials, typically wood or aluminum clad wood. Applicants will need to submit the same general information covered in the previous slide, minus the window assessment, because these are non-historic windows and they don't require an assessment by an outside third-party person. I would like to do another plug for our tax credit program. As non-historic window replacement, if replaced with appropriate window materials that meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, will also qualify for a tax credit. And now we're going to move on to our case study for non-historic window replacement. This is a house that I worked on in 2020, I believe. The house had previously had steel windows from the 1950s in it. The windows were not part of the historic character of the house and were in a state of severe disrepair because they were steel frame windows. So the applicant requested to install new double hung windows that better fit the character of the house. And here you can see the final installation in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. Just see the difference between the 1950s steel windows versus the replacement windows and how much more appropriate those replacement windows are for the character of the house. This applicant also did apply for a tax credit for the work that was completed on the windows, and it did help to cover some of the cost of replacing the windows. One final comment on the window review process has to do with revising the landmark window review process. Landmark is continually trying to improve its process to keep up with the latest advances in preservation and to better work for the communities that we work in. As part of that improvement, Landmark is looking to revise window replacement. I'm only going to touch on this briefly in this slide because this is really a long-range project for my team. In general, though, the revision process will be a very community-involved process and will open with landmark preservation discussion, commission discussion, lots of public review and input, public hearing review, and adoption before it's finally implemented. This will be quite a lengthy process for as Landmark wants to ensure that we have optimum public input on the process, and as much as possible, we want those revisions to be very thorough. So I know I've covered a lot of ground, and I wasn't able to cover everything that I wanted to cover, but I hope that this is at least a decent primer for our process and why we review historic windows and why it's important. If you would like to do additional research on this topic, there's a ton of resources out there. You can look, you can throw a rock and you'll hit something. So here are just a few resources that I used when putting this presentation together. Like I said, there are a ton out there, but this might be a good place for you guys to get started if you're interested in restoration or learning more about the benefits of restoration. So before I open the presentation up for questions, here's our contact information. If I don't get to your questions today, please feel free to reach out via phone or email, and I'm happy to answer it after the presentation. And a list of our upcoming webinars is also on this slide. We'd really encourage you to attend them. They're really great topics that are coming up. So we'd love to see you there. And then here, I'm going to just stop right here. And this is our, again, our rules of engagement, if you will, for asking questions during this presentation. So I'll open it up now to whoever has any questions. Thank you. Joe, it looks like you might have a question.
Yeah, I got one. We had a couple of questions. Thanks for taking this and putting this on. I really appreciate it. One about the tax credits. Are you still allowed to take those tax credits if you do the work yourself?
I'm not the expert on the tax credit program, but I believe as long as you document the work and can clearly demonstrate the money and time that you spent to complete the work, you could still qualify for that tax credit if you're doing it yourself. You just need to keep clear receipts and clear photographic evidence of the condition for part one and then the result for part two.
Yeah, thank you.
You said you had another question?
Yeah, I was being quiet in case there was something else. On the replacement of the windows, and this kind of goes more to demolition, and I'll probably join that other session later in the year. In that example that you gave on the turret house, is there any requirements, or has Landmark considered requiring homeowners to recycle those materials? For example, the windows that were pulled out, I don't know how many there were. It's very possible that I could have used maybe pieces and parts of those windows in my house, right? Some of those materials are virtually unobtainable in this day and age, right? You can't find 100-year-old materials anymore. So has Landmark considered some sort of sharing or some sort of program so that those materials don't go to landfill, but can be reused in other historic homes?
You know, Joe, that's a really great idea. We don't have a program like that in place, but maybe that's something we can explore when we're looking at revising our window program or window review process. I do know that there are many salvage yards out there currently that do take historic materials, brick, windows, and otherwise, and do salvage those. They're all over in Denver. So that is one place you can get some of this material. I'm with you. I totally understand. Historic windows are made out of old growth wood, and you can't find that anymore. It's really dense and resistant to rot. So I totally understand that question. I think it's a great idea. Maybe we can incorporate it in our process.
Yeah, that would be great, just to have make the homeowners who are doing the demo aware of that, and even just not forcing them, but making it a requirement that they donate, sell, or otherwise keep that in the community, give it to one of the organizations that are already out there or companies.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. Any other questions? Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Amanda, who's assisting me with this review. Amanda, are there any raised hands?
Yes, can you call on Gabrielle next?
Okay, all right. Hello, you can unmute yourself.
Here I am. Hi, Jesse. Thanks for calling.
There.
Yeah, I have a few questions. This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for putting this together. It was really informative and very, very helpful. One of the questions I have is on the review process. If you plan on just repairing and maintaining your windows, do you need to go through the review process?
You do not. So landmark reviews work that requires a building or zoning permit. And in this case, if you're doing strictly restoration work, it would not require a permit and therefore would not require landmark review. So restoration, even the installation, if you're taking a single pane glazing and replacing with double pane glazing, that would not require a review either. So that's just a benefit of one benefit of restoring rather than replacing. It requires a less tedious review.
Excellent. And I'm totally on team repair. So I think that's really great. Second question is the tax credits that you mentioned, are they through the state or are they federal?
So Denver is what's called a certified local government. And as a certified local government, we are allowed to oversee the tax credit process for residential. Commercial properties would go through the state.
Okay, excellent. So even for like an HOA?
Yes, ma'am. Okay. If it's an income producing property, if it's a multi-tenant, I believe that would be a state, that's an income producing property, 25% would go through the state review. Again, I'm not the tax credit expert, but if you want to send me that question by email, I'm happy to forward it on to other experts on our team and they can better answer that question. It gets a little tricky with HOAs because there's individual property owners, but it's in a commercial property.
Yeah, so I do know that our HOA is a nonprofit, so that might help. But I will, I'll send that question along just so that we can get that processed in the right way, because those tax credits would be really helpful. And then the other question I have is, where will this be posted? I know that you've recorded it, and I want to forward it along to a number of other people.
So if you look on the screen now, it's our webpage is www.denvergov.org/landmark. You can go to that website. On the right-hand side of the page, there will be a list of tabs. At the very bottom, I believe, there is a link to our webinars. You click on that tab and it'll take you to our page and you can see all of the webinars that we've posted so far.
Excellent, thank you. And also, is that where you would find any recommendations for people who could potentially do repairs?
Yes, so in our, on the side of that right-hand side, there's also a design review tab. You'll click on that. There will be a tab for window replacement. You'll click
Okay.
on that, and in that tab, we have our guide to historic window replacement.
Mhm.
And in that guide, there is a list of window professionals. I would also point you to our nonprofit partner, Historic Denver. They have a list of contractors and window professionals that you can get through their website as well. So you visit just Historic Denver.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Jesse, Georgia Burleson has her hand up, so we'll call on her next.
Okay, great. Hi, Georgia, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. On the house that the case study you showed where the steel windows were replaced,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, what kind of material was used on the replacement windows?
They replace, I believe, with wood. Let me go back to that slide because I do believe I have a section. Yeah, they replace with an aluminum clad wood material, it looks like.
Okay, so that is accepted, but vinyl is never accepted.
Well, correct. So we don't necessarily say vinyl, it's low quality materials, and vinyl falls into
Right.
the category of low quality materials.
Right.
As I said before in the first slide, vinyl windows have a high thermoplastic content, and they tend to flex and warp pretty substantially in the frames, which can put pressure on the rough openings and damage the brick or whatever the rough opening is made of. They also have to be replaced more frequently. So they're just not really a high quality material. They break down really quickly in this climate because there's so much sunlight and it's pretty dry climate. So they don't last very long, and the repeated removal and replacement tends to cause issues on the building.
That goes to sustainability.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what about composite windows?
We don't currently allow composite windows. Again, when we review our window or update our window process, we're going to look at alternative materials. I can't say specifically what materials we'll look at. It'll really depend on our vetting process and what that turns out as far as alternative materials and whether they're appropriate.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sure, anytime. Thanks for joining us.
Looks like we've got one more question from Jason Swope. Jason, if you want to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We've got one more question from Jason.
Okay. Hi, Jason, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I kind of had my question answered in the chat, but we live in a historic condominium that all has vinyl windows everywhere, and we were looking to replace them with something better, but that being a composite material and not wood. We can't afford to have all of our windows replaced with wood, and then they all look different from all the vinyl windows that exist at our historic condo currently.
Right. And is this a designated property?
Yeah, it is a designated historic property in a historic district.
Okay. So we don't allow alternative materials at this time. Like I said, we're reviewing revisions to our window process, review process. However, we do have the tax credit program that may qualify. And I've also worked on properties in the past. Tilden School is an example, where they had individual units, they had an HOA, and they had vinyl replacement windows and wanted to go back with more appropriate windows. We were able to issue a certificate of appropriateness for the entire building that was for a pre-approved wood window, and then individual unit owners could replace whenever they were financially able to replace them. It wasn't something, Landmark is definitely not going to force you to replace vinyl windows by any means. And we will work with you if it's more financially feasible to do a replacement over time with an appropriate material. We're more than happy to create that timeline, work with you to create that timeline. We also highly encourage the use of the tax credit program because the 25% does go a long way in helping to mitigate the overall financial costs or the costs that go into replacing windows. I will say too, because we're in a pandemic, they've declared a state of emergency. So our tax credit program, residential actually qualifies for an extra 5%, and income producing properties qualify for an extra 5%. So you're looking at 25% and 30% tax credit, and these can be applied for for a period of 5 years.
Okay, thank you. I actually live in the Tilden School, so is it possible you could forward that blanket approval to me?
Sure, yeah. Send me your email address and I'd be more than happy to send that along to you. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Amanda, are there any other hand raises, questions?
Nope, it looks like Joe raised his hand. Just we'll
yeah.
ask one more question and then we can end on this one.
Sure. Hey,
Yes.
Joe.
Hey, kind of related to Jason's question, I believe there's a program for, and I don't know, Jason, if you fall into that or not, but isn't there a program that Denver has for low income or homeowners who can't afford certain things where they will give you a loan of up to, I think it's $10,000 or $25,000 to do certain repairs to protect the home? And then the idea, I believe it's 0%, but the city recoups it on sale of the house whenever that happens.
I am not familiar with that program. I can certainly look into that. And whenever you email me, I will follow up on that. I do know that there is a program for first-time home buyers where they give you a loan. I think it's up to $20,000 that could potentially be applied for that, but I don't know if it could be applied for general restoration work. But yeah, that's certainly something to look into, and I can do my research and find out if that's a program that's available.
Yeah, another program exists. I don't know what the conditions are offhand, but it seemed like a program to preserve, keep the houses intact when people are not financially able to just pull it out of their pocket.
That's great. That's a great thing to know about. I'll add that to my presentation for the future. All right. Well, I really do appreciate you guys joining us today. Again, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. You can email us. Here, I'll put our contact information back up, and I'll get back to you pretty quickly with an answer. So thanks again. We really appreciate it.